Okay. Well, thank you guys for coming. This is a great crowd. And I explain what I'm going to be talking about today and give you a little bit of background on where this came from. Back when I was in rabbinical school, which now is 8 years ago, we each had to do kind of a dissertation, a presentation on some topic. And one of the ones that kind of spoke to me was how could such an ancient faith that relied on rules and scriptures that are thousands of years old, how could that possibly tackle modern problems? And it turns out it can. And one of the things I'll be talking about today is three separate issues that are very high-tech and modern and new and happening in our world right now, and how we can be informed by ancient writings who couldn't have imagined the things that are in our world today, and yet we can still use that wisdom to make good decisions. So you don't have to be Jewish to appreciate this at all, because these are common ethical things we're all going to be dealing with in the near term and the present. But if there's something specifically related to the faith, I'll explain it, because I'm taking a guess that we're not all members of the tribe here, and that's okay, because these questions are for everybody. So it's called Applying Ancient Rules to Our Modern World. And the challenge is, how can we keep up with technology? It's evolving so quickly. So many new things are happening. New problems are posed. How do we ground ourselves in our faith and our ethical traditions and still be able to roll with the changes? So some of the things, first thing to understand is that there's nothing specifically in any of the scripture against technology as a blanket statement. There's nothing either good or bad about technology, but it is all about how you use it. What are we going to do with this? It's a tool. I could say there's nothing in the Bible about using hammers and screwdrivers either. But when they were invented, I'm sure we had to come up with some rules around their use. Although by the time of the Torah, axes were a thing. Because if you lent your axe to your neighbor and it caused a problem, you were liable. If you knew the axe was broken and you lent it to the guy and the handle flew off and somebody got hurt, you actually were liable for that. So tools have been a part of life all the way back to biblical times. They've just gotten a little more interesting and a little more complicated. On the left-hand side, you can see just a handful of things that actually come out of the modern nation of Israel, showing you how advancing technology and fixing the world has been a value of our people since the beginning of time. And in the last just several decades, things like the thumb drive, the cell phone, the Intel chip, the pill cam, all invented over in Israel. In fact, it's second only to the United States in number of high-tech startups per capita. So Silicon Valley is number one. American ingenuity is right up there. Number two is Israel, if you can believe that. So always inventing things. If you go somewhere and you're in a car and you have your cell phone with you and you say, how do I get to a place? It uses map technology called Waze, W-A-Z-E, which is crowdsourced real-time traffic. So if there's an accident on 95, Waze knows about it because of other users that are on I-95 and unfortunately are stuck in it. Artificial meat, which sounds disgusting until you understand that it can solve a lot of our problems. So this is from 2013. And I apologize, the slides are advancing themselves here, so I'll go back anytime it goes before I'm ready. But the world's first laboratory-grown hamburger was in 2013. It passed a taste test. People said, yeah, I guess it passably tastes like a hamburger should. And in 2013, which is only 12 years ago, the cost of that one hamburger was $325,000 to develop and to grow it, using experimental techniques. Now it's down to dollars, single digits. All right? So it went from $325,000 to $11.36, and that was 7 years ago when I wrote this. So it's now even lower. Very soon we're going to see these products in our stores at a comparable price point to traditional meat. So a box of frozen hamburgers versus a box of frozen laboratory hamburgers are going to be about equal in the very near future. What's the difference? No cows were slaughtered to make the laboratory. It's the same product. It's indistinguishable to the human body as to whether it came from a living animal or whether it was cloned in a laboratory. So we can't make a whole cow yet. We can't clone Bessie very well, but we can clone the cells that make a hamburger. That we have the technology to do right now. Now, here's a little bit of details in how it happens. We take tissue sample from a cow. Bessie can live out her days grazing in the fields. You don't have to kill her for this. We take a tissue sample. We extract the cells from the tissue. We put them in a vat. We grow lots and lots and lots of more of those cells. And then we combine them, mince them, mix them up, and create a hamburger. Doesn't that just look so appetizing? Try not to think about where it comes from. But in about 6 weeks, you can be turning that sample into usable product. That has major implications for places that are suffering from famine. If you're suffering from famine, it means nothing's growing. You can't just bring a bunch of cows over. There's nothing for them to eat. You can, however, set up a laboratory and start cloning meat in the facility, and in 6 weeks, you could be putting out protein to the people. This could literally solve hunger. But of course, as Jewish people, it's not so much a question of can we do this, it's more of can we eat this? Would such a thing be kosher? Well, the short answer is probably yes, as long as the animal that you're sourcing it from is one of the permitted animals. In other words, we don't eat pork. Any products from a pig are out. Whether you grew them in a laboratory or whether they occurred naturally, that's probably going to be a no-no, so no cloned bacon for us Jewish folks. But normally our rules are very strict about how the animal is slaughtered. What happens when you take that entire process away? We're not actually slaughtering an animal. What is the product? Is it even meat? Well, there's been a ruling on this already. Hard to believe. Come on. But we have to go back in time before we go forward in time, and I'll tell you what the ruling said. How can we possibly go back to 1,500 years ago rabbis who couldn't possibly have had an imagination that we'd be cloning things in a laboratory to find our sources? Well, it turns out they did think of this. There's a very famous story from Rabbi Shimon, son of Halafta. By the way, to understand this, you have to understand what the Talmud is. It's not so much a law book as it is a record of discussions and arguments that the rabbis had to try and make sure that we were following the law correctly. And sometimes they came up with absurd arguments, just the most over-the-top what-if scenarios that normally a 7-year-old would have. Like, what if aliens came down to earth and they wanted... Okay, the rabbis of the Talmud thought of crazier stuff than that. And this is one of these examples. Do we believe this story actually happened? I don't know. Probably not. But you're going to see how they think as we tell this story. So Rabbi Shimon bar Halafta is walking down the street one day when out of the blue he meets 2 lions. Not in a cage. This is not good. So Rabbi Shimon probably figures this is the end. I'll better start praying. He whips out the Psalms, always good to do when you're in trouble, and he finds one of the Psalms that talks about lions. The young lions roar for their prey and their food comes from God. And just like that, 2 lumps of something fall from the heavens. The rabbi sees this happen. One of the lumps gets taken up by the lions, and they eat that, and they're happy with it, and they leave the rabbi alone. So he takes the other lump of mystery material back to the academy. And what does he want to know? Never mind the fact that this magically fell from heaven. Forget that. He wants to know, would this be kosher? Could I eat it? And they have a whole argument about, well, this meat didn't come from an animal. It just fell from the sky, miraculously, at a time when it really helped you out because lions were in your way. And they discuss back and forth whether you could eat it. Never mind where it came from. That's not the important part. And the ruling was yes, because nothing unclean would ever come from heaven. And no animal was slaughtered in the process, so it's not even really meat. This was 1,500 years ago, folks. They were actually thinking about this, and now it's come true. So now we have 2 stories from all these centuries ago that actually do inform us with laboratory-grown meat. And sure enough, in 2017, the Committee for Jewish Law and Standards of the Conservative Movement, the Rabbinical Assembly, put out a pre-position paper. I say pre-position because this stuff is not yet in your grocery store. You can't buy this at Publix yet, but it's coming. And they said, okay, if this was out today, could we recommend it? Would it need kosher certification? And they came up with only 2 issues that aren't deal breakers. Grow the cells in the vats at the laboratory. They use calf serum as one of the growth mediums. That's a blood product, and that would make it not kosher. But that was 8 years ago. By now, I'm sure they've come up with something a little less invasive than calf serum, something artificial. That would be okay. The second issue was the issue of appearances. Just like the rabbis of the Talmud were like, well, just to be on the safe side, we'd better slaughter that animal like it was regular and treat it like it was normal in case anybody else was watching. So because of that, and because if you had a laboratory hamburger in this hand and a regular hamburger in this hand, you'd be hard-pressed to tell the difference if there was no packaging. So to make sure we don't make a mistake, we should treat it like it is a meat product. But technically, it would be vegetarian. It's not a vegetable product, but it's also not meat. No animal, the definition of meat would have to change, right? No animal was slaughtered. How can you call that meat? It's just miscellaneous. Therefore, you could have that with dairy, which is, again, a kosher rule that we follow. We don't mix meat and milk, but in this case, we could. But the rabbi ruled here in 2017, for appearance's sake, you shouldn't. Don't put cheese on it because... And what if you had both products in your freezer and you mixed them up? Then you could inadvertently be making a mistake. So this opens up a lot of possibilities. People come to me and say, hey, Rabbi Craig, I want to do more kosher, but two problems. One, it's really expensive, which it is. Kosher meat is about 3 times the price of traditional because there's a lower demand for it. There's a higher investment in how you can only put out so much of this product. We can only use the front half of a cow, the short version of the story, and the number of pounds per day that you can produce doing it by hand in a ritual way is way below what the factories can put out. So it's 3 times as expensive. Here's a company that's working on it called Memphis Meats, and they're talking, this was, again, back 7 years ago, that they can produce about 10,000 pounds of beef from a single sample of a living cow without killing that cow. That's insane. Well, it's going to reduce animal cruelty. They take a single biopsy from the animal. I don't even know if they feel it. And that animal doesn't need to be harmed. No slaughter. Bessie can go live out her days in the pasture, carefree as a free-range cow. We got what we needed, 10,000 pounds of beef from that one sample. Energy efficiency. I told you what it costs to make 1 pound of beef. You need 1,800 gallons of water and a bunch of land, and it's going to produce a bunch of methane. Here you need a factory operating for 6 weeks, and you can turn that sample into 10,000 pounds of food. So it's much more efficient in terms of cost per calorie generated. Population. All right, we talked about places that are experiencing hunger. And right now, the only thing we can do is either pick them up and move them somewhere which is not feasible for large populations, or to ship supplies in, big bags of rice and flour and staples, but that's not protein. That's not helping them. We can't just start up a herd of cattle in a place that's suffering a famine, but we can throw together a factory in pretty short order and start pumping out protein for these people. It's a nearly endless supply. You just need to keep a handful of cows around for you to get your samples from, and you can have a never-ending chain of calories. And you can set these up in areas that normally would not even be candidates to have cattle. You can set it up in a desert. As long as you have access to electricity and water, it's all you need. Okay? Health benefits. We briefly brought this up. Is it good for you? Well, you're not going to have salmonella. You're not going to have E. coli or mad cow because you're going to screen the sample and protect the vats from contamination. Whereas out in the wild, how often do we read about a recall of meat because something happened? Also, somebody asked about adding things. Yeah, things like omega-3 fatty acids, vitamins, minerals. You can put extra stuff into the product since you're making it from the... Here's one of the investors. You guys know him, Richard Branson, Virgin Atlantic, Virgin Cruise Lines, Virgin the Record Store. He owns a whole bunch of stuff. But he has bought into this. He said that, I believe in 30 years or so, we'll no longer need to kill any animals. And that all meat will either be clean or plant-based, taste the same, and also be much healthier for everyone. Anyone here have a plant-based burger in their life? We try one of those Beyond Meat things, or what's the other one?
Veggie burger.
Veggie burger, but that's been around forever. But the Beyond Burger, they've made some advancements, but let me tell you, it's still not quite the same.